Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, we're nearing the end of Series 7 of today's Tolkien Times. It's been a lot of fun doing these Middle-earth Map Mondays this series. Let's go ahead and start off week 56 with Middle-earth Map Monday. So I've had a lot of fun putting together this series of episodes, looking at the Shire, the Old Forest, the Barrow Downs, Bree, Lindon and the Grey Havens, and Annúminas. Today, after running out of time last week, we're going to look at the other capital city of the Kingdom of Arnor, Fornost. Now, Fornost is located at the southern end of the North Downs. It's about 100 miles due north of Bree, at the terminus of the north-south road that goes all the way down past Bree, past Tharbad, down to the fords of Isen. Now, since it is as far north of Bree as Annúminas is north of Hobbiton, and we know that Hobbiton and Bree are about 80 miles apart, Fornost is about 80 miles to the east of Annúminas. The four of those locations marking the corners of a not-quite square, Hobbiton to the southwest, Annúminas to the northwest, Fornost to the northeast, and Bree to the southeast. Now, we don't know for certain when Fornost was established, but there is no record of the Númenóreans getting that far north early in their explorations before the fall. Now, since Annúminas was established as the capital of the northern realm of Arnor in Second Age 3320, it seems reasonable to conclude that Fornost was established, around the same time. It certainly could have been founded much later for reasons that we'll mention when we get to its history. Now, sometime early in the Third Age, but before 861 when Arnor was split up, Annúminas was abandoned and the capital relocated to Fornost. More on that in last week's Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, at that time, it became known as Fornost Erein, and that's the name I'm going to start with for the etymology. Fornost Erein is Sindarin and means the northern fortress of the kings. Now, the first element of the name is forn, north. The more common word is forad, as in Forodwaith, the northern waste, but they're obviously very close to one another and etymologically related. With the regions of Númenor a few weeks ago, we talked about how Hyar means south, but it literally means left hand. Well, Forad and Forn also mean right hand. Now, together, these tell us that the elves oriented themselves linguistically to the west. That's the opposite of Western European languages, as they orient themselves linguistically to the east. The word orient coming from the Latin word for the east, or the sunrise. So that's Forn, or north. The Ost is something we talked about before as meaning fortress. We see it a lot in Belagost, Osgiliath, Ost in Evil, and a lot more. Erein is an interesting word because though you've seen it before, you might not know it. It's the plural of Sindarin Aran, which means king or lord, and you're constantly seeing it in all the nobles with that R prefix, like Aragorn, Arwen, and more. Now, if you remember, in Sindarin, plurals are typically formed by changing vowels. A good example is Adan, meaning man, like Dunadan, with its plural form, Edain. Thus, Dunadan, singular, becomes Dunedain, plural. Erein is formed the same way. The first A in Aran becomes an E, with the second A becoming AI, pronounced I. So, Adan, Edain. Aran, Erein. So, Fornost Erein is literally North Fortress Kings. Now, for more on the word nerdery of its other names, like Norbury and Dead Man's Dyke, listen to the philology fair that Sean and I did in episode 330 of the Prancing Pony podcast. Otherwise, this entire episode would be word nerdery instead of map stuff. Let's chat about the history of Fornost Erein now. Remember earlier when I said that it couldn't have been founded much later than SA 3320, when Arnor was established as one of the two realms in exile? Well, that's because in the Disaster of the Gladden Fields, in Unfinished Tales, we read that after the fall of Sauron, Isildur, the son and heir of Elendil, returned to Gondor. There he assumed the Elendilmere as king of Arnor, and proclaimed his sovereign lordship over all the Dunedain in the north and in the south, for he was a man of great pride and vigor. He remained for a year in Gondor, restoring its order and defining its bounds, but the greater part of the army of Arnor returned to Eriador by the Númenórean road from the fords of Isen to Fornost. So, Fornost was already established and important enough to send a greater part of the Arnorian army by Third Age 2, which is only a little more than a century, 123 years to be precise, after the founding of Arnor itself. Now, going back to last week, Elrond explained that the men of Westernesse were diminished after the war, and as Annúminas fell into ruin, the capital was moved to Fornost. After the division of Arnor in 3rd Age 861, when King Eärendil died, Fornost became the capital of the Kingdom of Arthedain. Of those three smaller kingdoms, Arthedain survived the longest. Rhudaur became allied with Angmar by 3rd Age 1349. Círdan was finally abandoned in 3rd Age 1636, but arguably had ceased to be a kingdom when its last prince was killed in 3rd Age 1409. In fact, it's that conflict of 1409 that I want to look at briefly here, and we're going to look at this from Appendix A in The Lord of the Rings. A great host came out of Angmar in 1409, and crossing the river entered Círdan and surrounded Weathertop. The Dunedain were defeated, and Arveleg, then king of Arthedain, was slain. The tower of Amansul was burned and razed, but the Palantir was saved and carried back in retreat to Fornost. Rhudaur was occupied by evil men subject to Angmar, and the Dunedain that remained there were slain or fled west. Círdan was ravaged. Arafor, son of Arveleg, was not yet full grown. He was 18. But he was valiant, and with aid from Círdan, he repelled the enemy from Fornost and the North Downs. By the way, there's that Círdan fellow again. But that, 1409, was to be the last of their strength, really. By 3rd Age 1974, Fornost was captured, and the two Palantiri that their last king, Arvedwi, had taken from Fornost with him when he fled to Foreshell, drowned with him. The next year, Círdan summoned all who would come to him, from Lindon or Arnor, and when all was ready, the host crossed the Lune and marched north to challenge the Witch King of Angmar. He was now dwelling, it is said, in Fornost, which he had filled with evil folk, usurping the house and rule of the kings. But he was defeated by the host of the west, led by Arnor and Círdan. Still, by that point, the kingdom of Arthedain was gone and Fornost abandoned. And while we read last week that Aragorn would restore Annúminas during his reign, we aren't explicitly told that Fornost would also be restored. However, Gandalf did tell Barlaman that the king will come there again one day, and then you'll have some fair folk riding through. Speaking of fair folk, thank you for riding through this episode with me. But folks, that does wrap it up for Middle-earth Map Monday on Fornost. But if you have a mailbag question you'd like me to answer next series, please email it to barlaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. That's why I'm doing the maps this series. The bag is pretty much empty for now. So send it in and let them know it's for today's Tolkien Times. I'll get to it just as soon as possible, with priority going to supporters of the show on Patreon. Speaking of my patrons, I am grateful for your support. You guys make it possible for me to invest the time and resources into researching, writing, shooting, and producing these episodes. Now, if you'd like to be a part of that, visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to find out how you can join the TTT Content Council, determining what I talk about, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we learn more about the professor himself. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.